In lieu of a sermon this morning, this is a wonderful and special day in which we are going to hear amazing stories of inspiration and faith, encouragement, and about women in the lives of many of our members this morning. But I want to set this up and put this into context as to why it is important for us to share our stories this day. In 1983, the novelist and poet Alice Walker coined a term that might not really be that familiar to us, which is the word womanist. She coined the term womanist in a collection of short stories, real-life, nonfiction short stories about women in her life, in which that collection of short stories was called In Search of Our Mother's Garden. Now, Alice Walker was a feminist herself, and she felt indebted to the number of women who had gone before her, who had paved the way and who had shattered through the glass ceiling of literature and of academia. But she was also clear that the feminist movement hadn't really spoken to her experiences. That it spoke to some of her experiences, but not to all of them, and particularly as her experiences of being a woman of color. And so Walker is quoted as to have said that womanist is to feminist as lavender is to purple. We are all sisters, Walker said. But Walker wanted to make sure that people didn't think that she was at odds with the feminists. She was very grateful for the feminist corrective in our society, as much as I want to make sure that today, as we are not taking a feminist approach to our worship service, but taking a womanist approach to our worship service, that we're not at odds with the feminist movement either. So, what is womanist theology? Womanist theology took a different look at the liberating story of God in the Scripture and God's liberating work as a whole, rather than the way that maybe some of the feminist theologians had done prior. And the mother of womanist theology is a woman named Dolores Williams. And she is the first womanist theologian. And Dolores Williams writes, "There are many powerful, strong women in Scripture, strong and powerful women of color. But we don't recognize or appreciate how those women came to have power. It was rarely granted to them, rarely given to them. They had to overcome sexism and racism and classism. And they had to carve out a niche for themselves through innovation, and they had to solidify that niche that they carved out for themselves through relationship." So womanist theologians, they prioritize a few things that I want to lift up to you at this time. They prioritize, obviously, innovation, thinking creatively and outside the box. And they prioritize relationships among, and particularly among the generations. They have a profound sense of humor, and that sense of humor allows them to get through many of the struggles that they have endured. They have a spirit of dignity that refuses to be broken, and they pass down wisdom from generation to generation, and that is at the heart of womanist thought. One of the ways that womanist theologians and womanist thinkers have sort of diverted from feminist theologians and feminist thinkers in the past is around the symbol of the kitchen. Many feminists worked hard so that women could leave the kitchen, and yet womanist theologians and womanist thinkers have come and said, we kind of like the kitchen. It's our place. It's a place and a niche that we've carved out for ourselves. And it's the place where mothers and grandmothers, aunts and sisters and cousins have shared their stories and passed down their wisdom from generation to generation in a safe place. So back to Dolores Williams, the mother of womanist thought. She says that among the many prophetic scriptures that womanists laud and lift up, they take very much to heart what the prophet Joel writes, which is in Joel 1:3, "Tell your children of God, and let your children tell their children of God, and let their children tell the next generation of God." So that sharing of story and that passing down of wisdom is very much at the heart of womanist thought and womanist theology. And so today, we're going to hear stories, because it's in the sharing of stories that wisdom is displayed and wisdom is shared. We're going to hear stories of women that have inspired, encouraged, in some cases corrected. I'm not going to lie, there was a lot of women correcting me growing up. They moved us, they informed us, they taught us how to live, they told us who we are and whose we are. And they have helped us, not just in the past, but even today, into becoming who we ought to be. So like Alice Walker did in her book, In Search of Our Mother's Gardens, we are going to collect stories today and tell the stories of these women. And we will tell them because we've been commanded to by the prophet Joel, and we will tell them because there's power inherent in sharing of stories, power to move us closer to the witness of God would have us share. These are good news stories. If you will, they are gospel stories. So I imagine when Naomi took Ruth under her wing and Ruth decided to stay with Naomi, I can imagine them working side by side, day in, day out, laughing and sharing stories with one another. I can imagine Naomi teaching Ruth much the same way that I bet many women have taught you the wisdom through your lives and through your years. And if they're anything like my own, they probably started with the words, "When I was your age." So today we're going to hear 5 stories. Stories of women who may be real or fictional. They may be relatives or neighbors, coaches, teachers, people from our churches, people from the past, young, old. Actually, I don't know who these folks are going to be sharing about, so they all might tell the same story about the same person 5 times. I wouldn't know. But we're going to hear 2 stories and then have a musical interlude, and then we're going to share 3 stories and conclude with another musical interlude. So at this time, I'd like to invite our first storytellers to come forward, Jodi Cleesattle and Carol Hill.
So when Darryl asked me to do this, I couldn't think of one person initially, but the first thing I thought of was something I had written about 2 years ago on Mother's Day. So I'm going to start with that, and then I will explain it. When I was a young child, I had a mommy. She was my sun and my moon, and she taught me patience and tenderness. When I was a young teen, I had a ma. We struggled sometimes, but she taught me strength and resilience. When I was a young woman, I had a mother-in-law. We grew close, and she taught me dignity and that the bonds of women are lasting. When I was a young mother, I had a mama. She made my heart grow, and she taught me to love fiercely. 4 women, 1 taken by death too soon, 3 in my life still, all who taught me, loved me, made me grateful for good, strong women. So a little bit about these 4 women. And sorry that I can't follow instructions and just pick one. The first is my mother, Janet Sue Wooten Cleesattle. She was only 31 years old when she died, and I was 6. We were in a car accident coming home from picking up a bookcase for me and my brother. What I learned from her, from my own memories and from what others told me about her, was patience and kindness. She was strong, but so gentle. She made cupcakes to take to school on my birthday with M&M eyes and red licorice smiley faces. She sewed all my clothes. In fact, for a couple years after she died, all my school pictures still had me wearing the same clothes because I was kind of shrimpy when I was little. She was generous to a fault. She gave my favorite Barbie camper to a little neighbor boy who didn't have many toys. And this so traumatized me that I had to buy the same camper on eBay years later in my adulthood. Her death changed my life, but it made me stronger. The second woman is my first stepmother, Adelaida Robles de la Merced. She and my dad got married when I was 10. Ma had always wanted a daughter. She had 4 boys, although the oldest I never knew because he died in infancy when she still lived in the Philippines. I learned from Ma about surviving and overcoming obstacles and prejudice. She worked hard and she was very smart, but getting ahead at work was a struggle. Too many people assumed an accent meant stupid. She had my dad divorced when I was 19, but she has remained in my life, and she's still a fighter. The third woman is my mother-in-law, Diane Towigo Crittenden. She seemed to have a perfect family and to be a perfect mother. She had stayed home with her kids, and they lived a comfortable life. She was close to her extended family and was always a gracious hostess. When her son and I divorced, there was a year or so when Diane and I didn't see each other. She felt torn and thought she needed to be loyal to her son. But then she decided that her son's divorce shouldn't undo the nearly 20 years we had known each other. What I have learned from her is the importance of kindness and that family bonds are forever. Finally, the fourth woman is my stepmother, Eleanor Ruth Markham Cleesattle. Ruth and my dad met and became friends when they were both married to other people. And there was no hanky-panky going on. They were both involved in local politics in Ohio. They drifted apart, but years later, they met up again when both were single. When they married, my then 2-year-old daughter, Annika, who I see has snuck in to join us, was the flower girl. Mama is amazing. She's one of the strongest women I've ever known. She's had far too much pain in her life, but she chooses to love. What I've learned from Mama is how to be a mama bear, how to guide and protect my children, and how to love fiercely. And although I lost the woman who was my birth mom, I've been so very fortunate to have these 4 mothers in my life, each a little bit different, but all who have taught me so much about what is important in life.
When Reverend Darryl, Pastor Darryl, asked me to choose a woman who had mentored me, I said, oh my goodness, I've had so many incredible women in my life that have guided me throughout my life. After considering the many women mentors I have had throughout my life, I chose Reverend Nancy Childress, pastor of Great Falls United Methodist Church in Great Falls, Virginia, where I lived for 26 years. Reverend Nancy saved my life, and she taught me how to not be so nice. But I need to give you a perspective on this. A year to the date after my mother had passed away in 2006, a neighbor invited me to dinner. Reverend Nancy was there and encouraged me to attend Great Falls United Methodist Church. I went the next day, and her sermon spoke to my heart. She was new to the church, coming from the United Methodist Church in Arlington, Virginia. She was relocated as Methodist ministers do after about 2 years. But I believe her relocation happened earlier because she established a radical outreach to the homeless. The church had showers, and Reverend Nancy invited the homeless to come in to take a shower. There was a preschool center in the church, and the parents were concerned by the idea that homeless would be in the same bathrooms as their children, even though they would not be there at the same time. So Reverend Nancy was relocated to Great Falls UMC. We had a preschool, but we had no showers. So Reverend Nancy came to be a very powerful pastor of the church. I became very involved in the church because of her calling to me. Reverend Nancy's sermons inspired me, and I wanted to give back. Reverend Nancy said, the way to welcome people into the church is to ask them to do something. And so I was going to Costco, and for $200, I could make 100 non-perishable meals to feed the homeless. Lunches for the homeless with a Bible message inside. Our church members gave these lunches to homeless as they stopped at stoplights all over the area, all over the Washington, D.C. area. We also needed some help with our fellowship hour. Oh, wow. Who doesn't? Then Reverend Nancy encouraged me to organize the Sunday school classes, and so that they could provide refreshments each Sunday for a different Sunday each month. We needed to welcome new members and grow our fellowship, and that was the best way to do it. Food was the key in the Methodist Church. The most amazing challenge was when the church needed a youth leader. The church had a person in mind, but he lived 2 hours away. And I told Reverend Nancy that I had room in my house and he could live in my house with me. So Shane moved in, and he was our new youth director. I think you can tell by the name Shane, he was a little rough on the edges, and he had had a background that I really don't think I wanted to know about. So after a few months, I had to talk to Reverend Nancy about Shane. The kids loved him. He was just so wonderful, played the guitar, took them to all kinds of places and movies and secret outings. They would have a mystery tour once a month, and the kids didn't know where they were going, but they always had a good time. But I needed to talk to Reverend Nancy about Shane, because his little habits during the week were a little off, coming in at 3 o'clock in the morning. And, my son had already moved, and, now this was this new guy in the house. So after a few meetings with Shane, Reverend Nancy and I had to incorporate tough love. It was difficult. It was a difficult time for me to be not so nice, but providing a young person the limits that he needed. Reverend Nancy taught me how to not be so nice, but in a kind way. Reverend Nancy spoke to my heart, taught me how to establish community outreach programs, and how to welcome a stranger into my home and establish limits. This was a special growth experience for me. Always, I learned to let go and let God.